2017, warming declined, but still higher than 2014's level. But I digress. We've been talking about global warming a lot this week, and we're keeping at it today. Our coverage comes on the heels of that UN report on climate change. It grabbed headlines at first, then just faded to the background after a day or so. The report warned of major consequences if we don't reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we're dumping into the atmosphere. Things like food shortages, mass migration, extreme weather events could become more frequent. Earlier today, I spoke with Lindsey Walter, a policy advisor at Third Way, a center-left think tank in Washington. Walter says there are some things we can do individually to lessen our impact on climate change.
So there are several things that people can do to lessen their impact on climate change. It can be simple things such as replacing your light bulbs, your appliances, your windows for more energy efficient versions of those. You can switch out your old vehicle for a new electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, or even use public transportation more frequently if it's available in your area. You can also switch over to a more plant-based diet and reduce your meat consumption, as well as trying to avoid some of the larger flights and avoid flying whenever possible. But I do want to note that while it is important to make individual change, that ultimately what we're going to need is institutional change, and we need to see it on a larger scale with governments and businesses. So I personally believe that perhaps the largest thing that you as an individual can do in order to fight climate change is to vote. Vote for representatives that are standing for bold and progressive climate change policies, and call existing representatives and demand for more engaged and aggressive climate policies. So as an individual, voting is one of your most powerful tools to see the larger change that we ultimately need to fight climate change.
As far as individual goes, we'll spread into the larger picture in a moment here, but recycling, cans, bottles, etc., are these really effective tools to address it, or do we need to go much further than that?
Yes, recycling is a component, and it can help, and I can get into a little bit more of the controversies around the cost and benefits of recycling and whether or not it's worth it or part of the grander scheme. But it needs to be coupled with a lot of other actions. And so while recycling can help reduce the amount of CO2 emissions, particularly for some specific recyclable materials, including municipal solid waste, paper, cardboard, and certain metals such as aluminum, have a larger CO2 emissions reduction than some other recyclable materials. But we also need to be focusing on consumption and packaging habits, because that can also reduce the waste that we would even need to recycle in the first place. So I would certainly say that recycling is part of the problem, but it's a little bit more complex of an issue than I think recycling in general terms means to the average citizen.
Okay, let's take this broader now. It seems pretty imperative that we get both the private sector fully on board and the government as well to tackle this issue head on. Do you think the private sector, for starters, is doing enough? What actions are they taking?
So for one, it is absolutely necessary for the private sector to be a part of this in order to meet our climate targets. And luckily, we actually have seen a lot of engagement from businesses in the private sector.